Hello and welcome, everyone. We're really excited to have you here today for our OCI deep dive here on Cloud Customer Connect. For anyone who might be new to these events, we are hosted on that CCC forum. Cloud Customer Connect is our Oracle community forum for end users. I'll be sharing some links throughout that will lead you back to those forums, and we invite you to create a free account if you haven't already and join in discussions, ask questions, look for upcoming events of all kinds. My name is Krithiga. I'm a program manager with the OCI go-to-market team. And today we have a special one-off event in our Day One and Beyond series with Larry Beausoleil and Jeremy Walker. For today's session, we have some guest experts joining us: Krithiga Gopalan, a director of enterprise security, and Paul Toal, an OCI security specialist, senior director, here to talk about zero trust security. Before I hand things over to our presenters, though, I'm going to run one quick poll. Anyone who's joined us for these sessions before will recognize this. We design these sessions with you, our users, our customers in mind. So we always like to know what you're interested in. So if you would take a moment to answer that poll, let us know what kind of topics broadly are things you'd like to see more sessions on. I always like to hear about that. Speaking of upcoming events, we have a second event this week. We have our usual Thursday deep dive. Tomorrow is what's new with OCI data integration. So several product managers and directors are going to walk us through the newest updates to data integration, including integrating data from Fusion apps, using OCI functions in data flow for AI prep, and a whole bunch more. So join us for that if you can. And then we're taking the next Thursday off for the US Thanksgiving holiday, but we'll be back on December 2nd for a deep dive into the newly released OCI certificate service with Shane Burgess. So I've dropped links for both of those in the chat. If you can join us for those, we'd love to have you. Our usual quick reminders, we encourage you to use that Q&A box down at the bottom of your screen. Any questions put in chat, I will ask you to move over to the Q&A box because that's where people are going to be looking to answer questions. We'll have time for Q&A at the end, but feel free to drop in questions throughout the entire time if something comes up and you'd like to know more. We're also recording today's presentation, of course, so if you have friends, colleagues who are unable to make it, or if you'd like to come back and check on something about it later, we're going to post the replay and I'll drop links to where you can find all that a little later on as well. All right, I think that is quite enough for me. So Larry, Jeremy, go ahead and take it away.
Awesome, thank you, Kenna. Welcome everybody to another Day One and Beyond. Jeremy, it feels like it's been a couple weeks since we've talked with some customers and brought up some new topics.
Yeah, but it's been a minute. I miss it, but it's something I'm really excited about today. I'll tell you that today is something I know I'm going to learn some things today. I was really excited when Krithiga and Paul brought this subject to us, and it fits directly into what we've been really bringing to the customers who are getting into cloud, getting into OCI. And it's like, here's day one. We've got it, we're tooled. We know where we want to go with this, but what now? What do we do now?
Well, and it's a crucial topic because I've always talked about, as we progress through kind of the foundational items, security is one of the biggest things that we need to discuss. We need to make sure that we have security as we're building out. It's with every single part of the cloud that we build out. Every application we touch, everything that we do, you have to think about security. So this is why today, we'll pop in and show, you've probably seen Jeremy and myself, so we'll go ahead and show pictures of ourselves again. And then, so I'm a senior enablement manager here. I've been working in the cloud for a while now. And, Jeremy is the co-host on this journey, but we're actually going to step back on this one because this is a topic that I really want to hand it over to the experts on this. I want to hand it over to Paul and Krithiga on this particular topic because they wrote the paper. They're really diving into how security is done for OCI and particularly zero trust security. And this is some of the new stuff that's coming out. And so I'm gonna, Krithiga, Paul, thank you for joining us today and welcome to Day One and Beyond. And I'm going to hand it over to both of you for this topic and let you kind of take us down this journey. So thank you again.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
Yeah, thanks, Larry and Jeremy, for giving us this opportunity.
Pleasure to be here. So today, Paul and I are here to talk about the importance of zero trust security in today's modern cyber security world, and how to approach zero trust security with Oracle Cloud Infrastructure. So we'll discuss the highlights of the white paper that we have co-authored on this topic. And before we get into today's presentation, we request you all to take this short poll that you see on the screen now. That would help us understand the portfolio of our audience today and what is the awareness about zero trust security amongst our audience today. Kenna, will you be able to share the results if the poll has been? Okay, so 11% of you have answered, I'm a practitioner of it already. 56% are aware of the term, but not very familiar with it. And 33% has informed that they're not familiar at all. Excellent. I think this is a good mix of audience. So we would start talking about what is zero trust security itself, because some of you have mentioned that you're not familiar with the term. So it's good to establish that baseline, what zero trust security is and how we untangle it in our white paper. And we'll also talk about why is it critical for the organizations to embrace zero trust security now, if not already. And then we'll introduce the highlights of our white paper and the approach we have taken in our paper, and then discuss how the OCI security can simplify the customer's exercise of shared security responsibilities. So all this will culminate in a zero trust security outcome. So please note that it's not going to be a OCI security overview session. The focus is not to explain each and every security service that we have. Rather, the focus will be more on the zero trust security aspects and the highlights of our white paper itself. Let's try to define what is zero trust. So some people see zero trust security as a network architecture, while some others view it as philosophy. As authors of this white paper, we see zero trust as an approach encompassing not only certain design principles, but also a wide range of security controls. It's all about lowering the level of trust in your network and considering how you can design and deploy appropriate security controls based on the assumption that your network is compromised. So this is the keyword here. Your network is compromised and cannot be trusted implicitly. So let's demystify this definition in the subsequent slides. So zero trust is all about no static trust is placed on any entity. The trust has to be continuously computed dynamically at runtime so that risk can be avoided. So before we demystify the definition further, we'll see why is it important now for the organizations to embrace zero trust security. The security paradigm has changed. As you all know, over the last couple of decades, the traditional castle and moat security model, where anything and everything once inside the firewall was trusted, has long been outdated. So if you look where we have gone in the last couple of decades, we have embraced cloud computing, we have gone into mobile applications. So the data is distributed everywhere. It's not sitting at one place in one data center. Rather, it's distributed everywhere and it sits across a lot of different places. So while the external attacks are still a very predominant thing, we still see a lot of internal attacks coming in. And the cost of these internal attacks are getting higher and higher. So with all these factors in mind, and when you couple this with the recent COVID pandemic, definitely organizations were scrambling to put in place a secured solution to allow their employees to work from home safely. So they had to allow their employees who were sitting everywhere to access the data that is again sitting everywhere. And this all these things have to be securely accessed, and they couldn't rely on the usual network perimeter or the data center controls that they had. So what if organizations can't trust anyone or anything inside or outside their network? Will they still be able to be, will the organizations be still secure? So essentially, this is where zero trust security comes into picture. So if we see the data breaches that happened over the last couple of years, we can see that it's happening all the time in all sorts of industries and all sorts of organizations, big or small, doesn't matter anymore. But the scale of all these breaches definitely has gone up. The sophistication level has gone up. The frequency has gone up. The recent SolarWinds attack is still fresh in many of our minds, right? So this is the time. Now is the time, really, the organizations have to start thinking about their new security approach. How do they evolve their security to have the right number of controls across different layers, starting from data to their users and around their applications and network and so on and so forth. So it's high time every organization that operates in a hybrid multi-cloud environment start embracing this zero trust security if they have not already. Let's try to demystify zero trust security. So essentially, there are three dimensions to it. Firstly, we need to think about the network itself. So zero trust security is not is all about not trusting your network and the network boundary. So as any other security exercise, you need to start thinking about what kind of assets you have and what are you trying to protect, what are the value of those assets. So and then you model the services in your networks and try to identify where the data is flowing between these services. And all these things become super important in the first dimension of zero trust security, which is focused on network. And once you understand all these things in the network, you start thinking about how to segment your network, how to limit the blast radius. Even if some breach happens, how do you limit the blast radius of that attack? And how to create micro network segments and implement packet level controls so that you can reduce the blast radius. So here is where we talk about different controls like isolated network virtualization and OCI. We'll talk about that in the subsequent slides. So basically, this is all about the first dimension. And lastly, the effective, efficient monitoring is quite important as well, because logging and monitoring will help you identify the patterns of activities and can provide indicators of compromise. So this is all about the first dimension, which is the network itself. And talking about the second dimension, which is the identity, we need to understand who is accessing the data and who is accessing the services. It could be a person, it could be another service, it could be a device. So we need to think about all these different kinds of identities that we have. And we should not be inherently trusting any of them. We need to authenticate and authorize them at every point before we grant access to them. So we need to define robust access policies to make sure that the right identities can access the right services and the right data with the right set of permissions. The third tenet of zero trust security is the services themselves. So we need to start thinking about the services with a zero trust methodology in mind. Again, now that the network can't be trusted anymore, the services need to be designed such that they can protect themselves. So we need to think how do we get the right level of security controls around those services, and how the services can dynamically apply these security controls in real time for every request response flow, not just at the edge or the perimeter level, but at every layer, right from infrastructure, network, application, data access points, and so on and so forth. And these services not only have to be monitored from the health perspective, but they also have to be monitored from a threat detection perspective to make sure that the services are not compromised. So as we all know, security is very hard to do. So we have to rely on open standards as much as possible so that we have the right level of security around those services, and we don't have to reinvent the wheel with some security loopholes. So that is also something that we need to keep in mind. So with all these things, just to quickly summarize, zero trust security isn't a tool or a product that you can buy, or it's not a checkbox that you can just go to an application and say, hey, get me zero trust security, and then you get it. It's not like that. It's a security paradigm. It's a methodology. It's an approach, in fact, a multi-phased approach that will take time, effort, cost, investment to adopt. And here is where we can help you. OCI can help accelerate your zero trust security journey. And that's what we aim to explore in our white paper. So we wanted to practically discuss where you can start and what controls you can start using in OCI to start that journey. So you might not achieve it in one day, but you can start the journey by as simple as you can enable multi-factor authentication. You can you can provide a good user experience through SSO. You can provide robust access policies. You can do identity propagation and so on. And then you can slowly build on from there, and you can start embracing this journey. So with that introduction, I'll hand it over to Paul to talk about the approach that we have taken in our paper. And before that, can I request you to launch the next poll? Yeah. So we just wanted to understand where your organization is with respect to the Zero Trust Security Program. So with that, I'll hand it over to Paul. Paul, over to you.
That's great. Thanks, Krithiga. I'll leave that poll running while I start, and then we'll have a look at the results of that. So I think Krithiga hit the nail on the head, really. Security is hard. She said security is hard, and zero trust is hard. It's going to take time. It's going to take cost. It's going to take effort to really adopt a zero trust security approach. And we wanted to look at OCI and see where OCI will help you towards that zero trust journey. It's not going to be able to do it all for you, but we can look at some of the design principles that we have within Oracle Cloud Infrastructure and say, okay, where are those security controls? Where are those design principles going to be able to help us? So what we did was we were looking for a framework. When we wrote the white paper, when we thought about how do we approach and how do you carve up zero trust security, we wanted a framework to really build that messaging around, build those controls around. So we looked, and there wasn't a really good set of principles out there. There wasn't a really good framework at the time. So we did eventually find a framework in the UK. I'm based in the UK, in case you can't tell by the accent, and the UK National Cybersecurity Centre, which is the organisation that's really helping UK businesses and UK government to be secure digitally. They came up with a set of principles that we call the Untrusting 8, but essentially it's 8 principles for zero trust security. And we looked at these and we said, well, whilst they're a UK organisation, actually the principles are generic enough that they're applicable to any organisation. It doesn't matter whether you're in the UK or not. It doesn't matter whether you're a large organisation, whether you're a small organisation. They are still relevant principles. So the more we looked at this, the more we decided that actually these principles are a really good set of principles on which we can hang security controls within OCI to help you understand the approach that you need to take. Because above and beyond anything else, we wanted the white paper to be practical. We wanted it to give you pragmatic advice and point you in the right direction. So when we're looking at this Untrusted 8 from the National Cybersecurity Centre, it very much breaks down in the same way that Krithiga introduced zero trust security. It looks at things you have to do around the network. It looks at identity, whether that's user, whether it's service, whether it's device identity. It looks at the services themselves. And all of that is really aimed at protecting the thing that you want to protect in the middle, which is your sensitive data. So one thing you've got to think about when you're starting to consider zero trust is you've got to start thinking about shared responsibility, because the chances are, especially if you're using OCI or a different cloud provider, you will have a shared responsibility. And depending on which level of as a service you're taking, you're going to have a different level of responsibility. And it may sound strange, but I put this, I use this slide a lot. I use this type of diagram quite a lot. And it's a fairly common diagram. It's not something that's Oracle specific. It's a general cloud diagram. But actually, there's a lot of confusion around the shared security responsibility model in general. And there's this really insightful quote I found from Gartner, which basically, if I paraphrase it, it says that the cloud providers, the bits in blue, which are the service provider or the cloud provider responsibility, are doing a good job. So OCI is doing a good job. We've got a lot of experts who know how to build secure solutions and how to build secure cloud platforms. But that's not really where the problem is. The problem, according to Gartner, is that by 2025, pretty much all cloud breaches will be because of some sort of mistake or misconfiguration by end users. So the bit that falls within the gray. So what we actually need to do is really focus on that. And we need to say, well, if we're really going to help you approach zero trust security, it's those bits we need to focus on, because we want to prove Gartner wrong. We want to basically say, actually, it's not going to be that, because we're going to help you so that that statistic comes down. And that's what we spend a lot of time doing within OCI, is really thinking about security, thinking about our security design and how we approach security, how we deliver capability. So let me quickly just explain that to you, because I think it's absolutely critical to understanding not just Oracle Cloud Infrastructure, but also understanding zero trust and how we start to deliver zero trust within OCI. So when we think about security, it's based on a set of security principles within OCI. And this really starts from the ground up with a security first design. And that means security isn't something that we bolt on as an afterthought. It's something that's an absolute core design tenet of everything that we do within OCI. But if you go back to that quote from Gartner, it's not just good enough to provide you with a whole stack of security controls and services for you to use, because security is hard. We keep saying this. So the chances are you'll misconfigure them, or you won't use them because they're too complex, or you won't use them because of cost. And we don't ever want that to be a problem. We want to help you address that gray area of the shared responsibility model, that bit that fits under customer responsibility. So when we do talk about security within OCI, we talk about it being simple. We want security to be easy to use. We don't want it to have to be a 6-month learning curve for somebody to have to become an expert in a particular language or in a particular set of skills to be able to use security. It must be very point and click. It must be very straightforward and easy to use. Secondly, we talk about transparency, or we talk about always on security. And this is massively important, because we don't want you to not be secure because you haven't turned something on. We recognize security is hard. We recognize that we want to help you be more secure. So if there's a security capability we can turn on by default, we will. So for example, within OCI, all data at rest is encrypted. You don't have to turn it on. It will be encrypted by default. In fact, you can't turn it off. So if you create an object storage bucket, it will be encrypted. If you create a block volume, it will be encrypted. It's not something you've got to worry about. We then talk about prescriptive security, meaning that, again, where can we use our knowledge and our expertise in Oracle to help you? Well, we can do that because we can give you the guardrails around security. So we build OCI. So if we're looking at security posture, for example, we know what sort of things, what sort of changes within OCI would weaken your security posture. For example, if somebody went in and made one of your object storage buckets public, that weakens your security posture. Well, we know that. So why would we leave you to build a rule that looks for that? So we give you rules. We give you guardrails out of the box that look for common things that would reduce your security posture. But then that very much feeds into the next one, which is how do we help automate security? It's all right saying we've seen somebody make an object storage bucket public, but that's not good enough. We don't want to have to then rely on a security analyst sat within Security Operations Center to see that and then execute a runbook to fix it. We want to automate that security. We want to be able to take that object storage bucket and make it private automatically, because that's the best thing to do from your security posture perspective. And then we want to build something that works together. We want to unify our security controls so it's not lots of different disparate capabilities and different solutions. The reason we're doing all this is to try and help as much as we can deliver a secure cloud platform. And one of the interesting things when you look at OCI and you look at OCI security is the majority of our OCI security services are delivered either at no additional cost as part of your OCI subscription, or they're delivered at cost. Because we don't ever want security to be a trade-off between can I afford it and do I want it? It should just be something that you use because it's best practice to use that. So going back to the NCSC principles, the National Cybersecurity Centre principles, they have 8 principles, and they broadly split them into 3 categories. They split them into data discovery, they split them into sort of access control and the sort of preventative controls, and then they have monitoring at the back end. I'm not going to go through these in detail in the interest of time, because I do want to leave time for questions and answers. But I just want to quickly go through these different principles and how we start to think about mapping OCI security controls onto these principles. We'll have a link to the white paper at the end of the presentation, which has the full mapping and goes into lots of detail behind what these different services do, how they map back to the principles, and why they're relevant and how you can use those. But if we look at principle 1 to start with, it's about the first 3 principles are all about discovery, understanding what you have out there. This is nothing new in security. Before you can provide any sort of level of security control, you need to know what you're protecting. You need to know what's already on the ground. So the first 3 principles look at that very nicely. So the first one is understanding your assets. So what data have you got out there? What's the sensitivity of the data you've got out there? What services are hosting that data? Who's using those services? What devices are users using to connect to those services? So there are some tools that can help you within OCI. You can see that list in the table, but you've got to realize that this isn't just a technical exercise. Yes, I can run some scripts to see what services I've got out there. Yes, I can run some scripts to see what sort of data I've got within my database and how sensitive it is. But it's also going to be more than that. You're going to be looking at project documentation. You're going to be looking at procurement records. You're going to be having conversations with IT. You're going to be having conversations with business owners to really understand that footprint, because that really is the foundation for everything that you do beyond there. We do have a document, you can see a link at the bottom, that helps you with that discovery exercise. Principle 2 then takes that a step further. It says, okay, well, now you sort of understand your assets generally. Let's really start to focus on identity, not just user identity, but service and data identity. We really need to understand who your users are and what they have access to, or should I say who your identities are and what they have access to. And again, there are a number of key controls within OCI that will help you do that. We've got the identity access management capability, coupled with identity cloud service, that really let you understand your users, let you understand what your users have access to, but also then start to provide capabilities so you can centrally collate that access into one place. We've also got the concept within OCI of instance principles and resource principles. So we can start to think about service identity. How do we give access for one service to be able to access another service securely without the need to store credentials in config files, for example, and be able to do it using a common centralized policy? So there are different things that we have within OCI that will help you towards understanding all these different types of identity you've got and what sort of access they have within Oracle Cloud Infrastructure itself. Principle 3 then again takes it a step further. We've done your assets. We've then focused on identity. Now we need to understand what your identities are actually doing, not just what they have access to, but what are they actually doing? And again, identity covers everything, including service, device, and user identity. So we need to start to understand the health of all of those types of entities. So we have some real core security concepts within OCI, like the hardware-based root of trust, to make sure that the server hardware itself is in good health. And there's no, for example, backdoor firmware being injected into the servers running OCI. From a service perspective, you can see we've got a whole bunch of different services that will help you monitor the health of your services. Everything from looking at the patch levels of the operating systems and the software that's running on them, to using analytic type data to see what sort of requests the service is getting, the health of the service, what sort of performance it's getting, what sort of events are happening within that service. And then finally, from the user perspective, we've got the identity platform. That's really letting you understand risk-based behavior and understand not just how users are authenticated and accessing, but also understanding more broadly the risk level associated with a user who's trying to access the services and ultimately get to the data that you're trying to protect. So after the first three principles, we then start to move on to access control. And NCSC split up access control really into two different areas. They look at coarse-grained authorization and fine-grained authorization. So just to be clear on the difference between the two, coarse-grained is typically looking at, can I get to this application, yes or no? Have I got the right permissions to be able to log into the HCM solution or log into this particular database? That's typically coarse-grained. Fine-grained is then looking at, what can I do once I'm in there? Once I'm in the HCM system, what's my roles? What data am I allowed to access within that HCM system? Same with the database. If I log into the database, what role do I have within the database? What objects, what data can I see? What permissions am I allowed to perform against that data or on those objects? And again, you can see in the table there, we've got a number of highlights. So the principal highlights are the particular areas that NCSC pull out within their 8 principles. So they look at splitting out coarse-grained and fine-grained. They also look at things like cloud-native security. They talk about encryption, they talk about network security, and they talk about break glass. So for each of those, we've got different capabilities that we can map directly against those principles to help you understand how you do that. So just to pick out a couple of these examples, looking at encryption, I talked about the fact that encryption's enabled by default. Well, by default, Oracle manages the keys for you, so you don't have to worry about it because we want to make security simple. But you might want to manage your own keys. So if you do, we give you a key management service called OCI Vault that lets you now manage your own encryption keys in a secure way. You look at things like network security controls, and we've got a range of different approaches for how we can deliver network security controls. We have security lists, we have network security groups. If you want to deploy things like next generation firewalls within your OCI tenancy, you can do that through our marketplace and through partner solutions. So there are a lot of different controls that we have, and I'm not going to go through each of these in detail because we haven't got time, and the white paper does it far more justice than the time I've got available to take you through these. That's just an example of how we're taking the security capabilities that we've got within OCI and mapping each of those back to the different principles that NCSC talk about. And then finally, just before I hand back over to Krithiga, let's look at principle 5. So principle 5 is a really interesting one from NCSC because this talks about authenticate and authorize everywhere. And this goes back to the very start of the conversation where we said we cannot trust the network. Therefore, we need to authenticate and authorize all identities that need to do something on that network. So that identity, remember, is a service identity, it's a device identity, it's a user identity. We're not just talking about people here. So if we take that principle that the network is hostile and we do then need to authenticate and authorize everywhere, it's what sort of controls do we have within OCI that will let us do that? And again, NCSC pull out a number of principles. They talk about stronger authentication. So they're talking about things like multi-factor authentication or adaptive risk-based authentication. It's not good enough just to give me a username and password. I want a username and password, but I also want to understand where you're coming from. When did you last log in? Is it a new device that you haven't used before? That's the sort of thing they talk about when they talk about stronger authentication. And we have controls within OCI through Identity Cloud Service and through OCI's Identity Access Management that lets you deliver that capability. Similarly, I've also talked about for service communication, how we can utilize instance principles and resource principles so that Oracle manages through certificates the actual authentication of service to services within OCI, but you have full control using the Identity and Access Management policy in OCI about exactly which services are allowed to talk to each other, what permissions they have. And that's the same policy that you're building for user identity and service identity. So it's a consistent approach that you can take. And again, consistency makes it simple. Simple makes it easier to deliver more secure solutions. So with that in mind, I'm going to hand back over to Krithiga, who's going to take you through the last 3 principles and then wrap up ready for the Q&A.
Thanks, Paul. So Principle 6 talks about focusing on monitoring your users, devices, and services. And given that all these things are more exposed to network attacks in the cloud architecture, it is more important to follow the cyber hygiene and continuously monitor them to identify the patterns of activities. So who's doing what and when. This can improve the visibility and correlation drastically. And Principle 6 itself talks about 4 types of monitoring. I'm not going to get into the details of each of these, as Paul mentioned. I'll just pull a couple of examples out in each of the categories. So service monitoring, for example, we saw the zero trust dimension on self-securing services. The services need to be monitored continuously, not just from the health perspective, but also from the threat detection perspective to make sure that they are not compromised. And this is where the automated prescriptive services that we offer, like CloudGuard, for example, will come into picture. So they can, CloudGuard can automatically detect the cyber threats and provide actionable recommendations to remediate them. And if you prefer, you can configure it to auto-remediate as well. And the next example, for example, DataSafe could be used for providing user risk assessment. And metrics are published by all the OCI services so that the customers can know about the health capacity and performance of all these resources. And coming to the next principle highlight, which is the user monitoring, all the identity related audit data is generated for every activity, be it done by administrator or end user operations, such as the user login or password reset and so on. So using the APIs, you can integrate all this audit data into your SIM system and into your UBA system, for example. And similarly, the third highlight the principle talks about is device monitoring. So OCI also creates, supports the monitoring enabled compute instances, for example, using the console or API. And risk-based authentication can also be done, for example, based on the device footprint that is collected by the identity service. The last highlight of this principle is the network monitoring, where, for example, the VCN flow logs will allow you to collect detailed metadata about every request response flow that is flowing through your network. So what is the source, what is the destination, whether the request is accepted or rejected based on the security rules you configure. So going to the next principle, which is talking about the connection monitoring. So the exact wording from NCSC is don't trust any network, including your own. Remember, we talked about this in one of the, as a key point in the definition as well. So when you think about security first architecture that we have taken within OCI, examples like isolated network virtualization, or as Paul mentioned, the hardware-based root of trust, they're all quite important. So these are the things that we can't show you in a demo in the console, but these things are the fundamental building blocks of the way we deliver OCI to our customers as a cloud platform. So it's available in every server, in every data center, in every region. So this is something that is inbuilt. And we have considered the trust that that is given to different critical components in a cloud infrastructure, including the servers, hypervisors, and networks. And we have designed a baked-in secure architecture to mitigate all these threats from within the underlying infrastructure itself. The second highlight of this principle is the networking controls. So beyond all these design principles, we offer a broad set of security controls that you can use while building out your solutions on OCI. So for example, the volumetric DDoS-based protection is offered to every customer. The customer doesn't have to do anything. It is just available for everyone by default. And the third highlight of the monitoring controls, we already talked about several prescriptive security controls and services that we offer, CloudGuard, for example. And remember the same, so all these monitoring controls help identify the security misconfiguration. So this is the same terminology that Gartner has used, as Paul mentioned, in the shared security responsibility model. So we try to prevent the customer misconfigurations through all these automated and prescriptive security controls that we provide with the vision of providing autonomous services. So For example, CloudGuard, while it is responsible for detection and remediation, Mac Security Zones is responsible for prevention of the security misconfiguration itself. So going on to the last principle, which is principle 8, this talks about the self-securing services themselves. We need to start thinking about them from a zero trust methodology in mind, remember? So we need to start thinking how we can deploy the security controls around them so that they can protect themselves, and how to make them standards based and so on. So OCI is basically architected on the principles of least stress, which culminates in a zero trust architecture. So there are 4 dimensions to the isolation property. The isolation from other tenants. For example, we provide this using isolated network virtualization, and several other things. I'm just giving one example. So the second dimension is isolation from the cloud provider staff. So this can be achieved using the hyper-segmentation feature of our OCI, where we separate the service enclave and the customer enclave. And the third dimension being ability to configure the isolation across the LOBs of the business. So for this, you have the ability to use OCI compartments. Using that, you can achieve this isolation across LOBs. And the fourth dimension being ability to configure isolation from the external threat actors. And this is where we have security architecture design principles like hardware-based root of trust, like Paul mentioned. So this principle highlights about self-securing services, as I mentioned earlier, and all these services have to dynamically apply these security controls in real time for every request response flow, not just at the perimeter level, but at every layer. So the standards come into picture here. So we need to start looking at standards-based services so that we offer the right level of controls, security controls around those services, and that we do not reinvent the wheels. And OCI strongly supports standards in many of our security services to create that open ecosystem and to avoid that vendor lock-in. This greatly provides the interoperability between the devices and services themselves. And just to give a few example of the standards base that we have, services that we have, we support federated identities through SAML, and we support OAuth, OpenID Connect, and SCIM for provisioning and so on and so forth. And not only in the identity aspect, but also many of our cloud services follow the open standards like CNCF standard, for example, Cloud Native Computing Foundation standards. So FluentD is used for logging, Cloud Events used for events, the open source FN project used for OCI functions, and so on. So we try to provide that open ecosystem, and we try to make those services self-securing and surrounded with a tight level of security controls. So this is a quick overview of all the 8 principles. Just to summarize, again, zero trust is not a tool. It's not something that you can just get overnight. It's a security paradigm that needs cultural shift in the organization. So hope you would have got an understanding of what zero trust security is and how OCI can provide you the capabilities to help you get there quicker. And as mentioned earlier, going on to the next slide. So OCI can help you all these zero trust principles through a combination of security design and the security controls that we offer. And as Paul mentioned, we try to take the burden from you for the shared security responsibilities through 3 main tenets: automated, always on, and architected in. We call them AAA tenets. And by this, we want to make security easier for every one of you, not just for big organizations or small organizations. It doesn't matter. We want to provide that consistent security for every customer and at the highest level. So just want to emphasize the fact that all these security controls are provided at no additional cost, just to make sure that everyone, security is affordable to everyone. And that is the whole ethos and vision behind the OCI security. So our security white paper, again, has been written in a very pragmatic approach. So you can, if you have not read it already, I would highly encourage you to read it and start the zero trust journey in your organization. And if you would like to understand more about it, or if you have any follow-up questions, always feel free to reach us. And one more thing to keep in mind is, though this paper is written based on the NCSC's zero trust security principles, the principles itself, as you would have seen, are not specific to any particular region or particular industry. So they are applicable to any organization in any region. And that's one of the main reasons why we took this framework for our white paper. So I hope all of you find this useful. And we have also published a blog that you can use to circulate this paper amongst your colleagues. So finally, going to the next steps, what you can do now, you can protect your workloads using our simple prescriptive integrated security offered through OCI. You could sign up for a free trial and try out our security services. Remember, most of them are free and included, so you will not be paying even a cent for it, for many of the services. And you could also try deploying the security landing zone that we have, which is based on the Center of Internet Security Foundation's benchmark for Oracle Cloud. So this reference architecture is a Terraform-based landing zone that you could use, and various security services are pre-configured that will allow you to get a strong security posture. And finally, if you need more information about any of our security services, please refer to our cloud security site. With that, I would like to open the floor for Q&A. I know we have a few questions already in the Q&A. And I thank you all for providing us this opportunity again. And over to the Q&A section.
So shall I pick up the first question then?
Yeah, sure.
I was gonna ask. I'll read through
them
for you.
Go for it. Go for it.
Yeah, for both of you to answer. So, first question we have is, when will IAM policies be more aligned to zero trust? The initial group administrator can do anything.
Yeah, so I think that my view of it is, I think that IAM policies are aligned to zero trust. Within OCI, we are denied by default. You only get access to anything if you write a specific allow policy to give a group of users access to something. And within that, you can very tightly scope it down to individual permissions. You can add additional where clauses to give additional context. So you can be very granular if you need to be with the policies. That being said, you are right, the initial administrator group does give access to everything. But that's not a group that we would ever recommend that you use on a day-to-day basis. That is very much a break glass administrator. We recommend that you use that to create your actual daily administrator accounts with the minimum set of permissions that they need, following the principles of least privilege. And then you essentially take that and you lock that away in a safe and only use it under break glass circumstances.
Well, it's yeah, and with some of the new stuff, I don't know if everybody saw, like IDCS and identity and access management have kind of merged when you create a new tenancy. So it's going to give you a little bit easier capabilities around setting up correctly. All right, on to the next question. There are some documented vulnerabilities from Microsoft around CBC Cipher. However, they're still used by Oracle. Is there a plan to retire CBC, etc., for TDE encryption?
Do you want to pick this one up, Krithiga? Do you want me to? I don't mind either way.
Yeah, go ahead, Paul. Yeah.
Okay. I think my view on it is I don't have the detailed roadmap for database in front of me, not on a specific feature function level. What I would say is, as we all know, security is a moving feast. It's constantly changing. We are constantly improving security. So if there have been documented vulnerabilities found, I'll be honest, I wasn't aware of them, then I suspect that they will be being picked up. If you have a specific concern and you are currently an Oracle database customer, then by all means raise a support request and find and ask what the specific plans are for that. And then you can get more detail on that.
All right. Do you have any white paper on how OCI works with third-party PAM tools to collaborate on zero trust security, particularly on app-to-app authentication on privileged password rotation?
We are not aware of any white paper that we have regarding this topic. But having said that, in our white paper, we have clearly talked about some of the areas that are beyond the scope for OCI. For example, the PAM, privileged access management. We currently don't have a sophisticated offering from OCI itself for this, but definitely the marketplace has a lot of PAM tools that we have, and OCI can work with any of those marketplace solutions. But I haven't seen any white paper for this specifically. Paul, have you seen something on
No,
this?
I haven't seen a white paper. What I would say is that everything to do with identity within OCI is either core OCI identity and access management, or it's delivered through Identity Cloud Service, which, as Larry said, is just being they're being merged together. And both of those have got an API first based approach. So you can integrate quite easily with PAM tooling through the APIs, to the SDKs, to the command line interfaces, in order to be able to do things like generate identities, reset passwords, etc. So I haven't seen any specific white papers on it, but it is achievable. We do have customers using tools like CyberArk today with OCI.
All right.
And before we move on to the next question, Paul, do you want to keep our contact slide on so that just in case people want to email IDs? Yeah, thanks.
Do you have any white paper on OEM, on-prem OEM, on zero trust security implementation when it is used to manage targets on public cloud?
So I haven't seen anything. I'll be honest, OEM's not my focus area. So I might not be up to date on what the latest papers and collateral is on that. Krithiga, have you seen anything?
Neither have I, but we can just look internally and then get back to you if we have found something. But currently, I don't have anything in mind.
And that's also a question that can be posted in one of our blog spots. I think Kenna posted a spot for posting questions or anything, so that's another area you can post that question. But we'll definitely look into it. And our last question. So, what is the difference between CloudGuard and CASB?
Oh, I'll take that. They are very similar in many respects. In fact, the team that built CloudGuard is the team that also built CASB originally. Essentially, CloudGuard is really the next evolution of CASB. So both of them really look at cloud security posture management. They look at understanding what's going on within OCI and is anything threatening your cloud security posture. So the key differences really are that CloudGuard is a native OCI capability. It's been built within OCI, which means it can take advantage of other OCI services. So, for example, CloudGuard generates events into the event service. That means that you can use the notification service, you can use functions, you can use the streaming service to be able to take these events and do things with them. And another factor is that, and probably one of the biggest factors, we talked about automated security. CASB is very good at telling you something's happened, and that's where it stops. CloudGuard will tell you something's happened and give you the option to automatically remediate the problem. Remember the example I gave earlier about the object storage bucket being made public? Well, let me give you one more example. Let's say somebody creates a compute instance and puts it on a public subnet with a public IP address. Well, CloudGuard can either terminate the instance, it can remove the public IP address, or it can stop the instance. And it can do that automatically for you. So immediately you're reducing your security threat, you're reducing the attack surface. The final differentiator from me is that currently CloudGuard has two what we call detector recipes, two types of recipes it looks at, two types of detectors it looks at. It looks at OCI configuration and it looks at OCI activity. CloudGuard currently, as we've been saying all the way along, is included with those detectors at no additional cost within your tenancy. So if you start using OCI today, you can turn on CloudGuard, start monitoring your tenancy, and it won't cost you anything for that monitoring within CloudGuard. CASB is a separately licensed service currently. Krithiga, anything to add to that?
Yeah, just one comment from my side. So as Paul mentioned, currently CloudGuard is primarily focusing on OCI. The support for SaaS would be something in the roadmap, but currently doesn't support SaaS, whereas CASB could be used for our SaaS applications as well. Yeah, that's something. And there is also some exciting features around threat detection and things like that coming on in CloudGuard. So obviously those support is not there in CASB, but these are some roadmap items. So it's subjected to change.
Krithiga and Paul, I know I have a question that I've heard from several of my customers that I think can fit in here. Krithiga, you opened Dimension 1 by talking about logging and monitoring, and you actually closed the principles with, talking about having that visibility across network identity and everything. With zero trust, that doesn't end externally. That also you also can't trust anyone, internal or external. What are we seeing some of our customers do to handle the huge amount of information coming in from our logging and monitoring services, from their applications, and how are they differentiating, or how are they distributing that workload internally across security, audit, and things of that nature? Do we have any good use cases or even information that we can point to there?
Do you want me to take a stab at that?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So I think the reality is it is a challenge. We do have more data than we've ever had before from a logging perspective, but I also think the tools are getting much better. And so, for example, we can look at logging and security events with an OCI focus on it, and we can say, okay, how can we do things better? So we can give you all the raw data. We can give you flow logs. We can give you audit logs. We can give you all sorts of monitoring statistics from OCI, and you can take that raw data and you can do with it whatever you want. You can feed it into your own NOC, you can feed it into your own SOC, whatever you want to do with it. That's all available for you to take. But we also utilize tools like CloudGuard, and CloudGuard very much helps you to take all that information and digest it into usable, what we call problems. So rather than just giving you the raw data, CloudGuard will take all the activity data from OCI and it will process it. And it will enrich it. And it'll say, well, actually, we've seen all this and we've spotted this problem. Somebody is not using a customer managed encryption key for their storage. They're using an Oracle managed key. That might be a problem. Or somebody has made an object storage bucket public, the example I keep coming back to. So it means that rather than taking raw data, you can take curated data and feed that into your SIEM tooling or your SOC or whatever. So you're still going to need to feed that data somewhere. You're still going to need to be able to respond to that. You're still going to need to be able to have security analysts who can look at that data along with the other data you're getting from other sources that might not be OCI related sources. But what we're doing is we're making that data available to you from OCI, but we're also trying to make curated feeds of that data available to you as well, so you're not being overwhelmed.
Awesome. Yes, and exactly. DataGuard is that, or CloudGuard is that huge tool in that aggregation of data. So, and I know that's something a lot of our customers, especially new customers coming into OCI, have a kind of get overwhelmed with. Here's all the tools. We have a lot of data. What do we do with it? So that's awesome that we have that solution for them going in.
So I think on this topic, I mean, this is a topic that we could probably talk for weeks on, but I think this is definitely a good start to understanding how critical it is to think about security when you're building out your application, when you're moving to the cloud, and this is just the starts. This is so this is something that we do have a poll up. So if you're still able to do that, but I do want to thank Paul and Krithiga for joining us today, because this is a conversation that, security is one of the biggest things you have to think about. I would say it goes probably security and then networking, and they just go back and forth every time you start looking at this stuff of which one is more critical when you start building out in the cloud. that Paul and Krithiga, thank you again for joining us on Day One and Beyond. More than happy to have you both back on this channel so we can talk more about this topic.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks for having us, Larry and Jeremy.